Hello and welcome to the webinar. Thank you for registering for this webinar. In today's webinar, we are going to talk about PMBOK 6th edition, Project Management's Book of Knowledge. What are the changes that have been introduced in PMBOK 6th edition? How is it different from the PMBOK 5? So let's get started with today's webinar. And topic of our discussion is going to be about everything that's there in the PMBOK in terms of the major changes that have happened within the PMBOK book of knowledge, which is introduced sometimes in September 2017. We'll also take a look at how overall the PMBOK body of knowledge or book of knowledge have evolved over the period of time. When was it launched for the first time and how it evolved? So a bit of a history, bit of a journey of the PMBOK is also going to be covered as a part of this webinar. We'll also take a look into the differences, some of the major differences between the 5th PMBOK edition and the 6th PMBOK edition. And we'll highlight a bit more about the 6th PMBOK edition. So let's get started. So we'll straight away jump into the first topic, which is about understanding the PMBOK. Now, PMBOK, as many of you must be already aware, that PMBOK was released by the PMI. Now, PMI, which is Project Management Institute, it's a global institute, it's a non-profit organization, and it offers various certifications. So, Project Management's Book of Knowledge was released by the PMI, and PMBOK actually helps in preparing for these certifications like PMP. Not only that, PMBOK is also regarded as the Bible of project management because PMBOK contains lots of information, lots of important information, which any project manager can refer to. And therefore, if you want to really learn about the foundations of the project management, you can certainly look up to the PMBOK. And as I mentioned, most importantly, PMBOK is such a book of knowledge. It contains different processes, some of the best practices, various terminologies, and guidance. So some of the guidelines provided in the PMBOK are very, very useful practically when we go back and start applying some of the concept, principles, and the best practices mentioned in PMBOK actually helps us in excelling in managing projects effectively. Therefore, they say that PMBOK is the golden standards in the project management. So these are some of the highlights of the project management's book of knowledge. Let's now understand a bit more about PMBOK. Now, PMBOK is nothing but a guide which is developed by the practitioners like me and the practitioners like all over the world who are been practicing project management for many years. So they all are part of the PMI, and being a PMI members and PMI active members, we always get an opportunity to participate in different surveys, the different ways through which PMI engages the practitioners. So one of the way through which PMI engages the practitioners is through the role delineation study. So in the role delineation study, PMI understand how the role of the project manager is changing over the period of time. And that actually helps PMI in making necessary changes to the PMBOK. Now, there are various people who have been practicing project management for quite some time, and many of them are already PMP certified or PMI ACP certified, or even for that matter, the program management certifications they have acquired through PMI. Now, these are the subject matter experts who are part of the PMI chapter and the PMI body who actually works in the area of the PMBOK enhancements. Not only that, PMBOK is basically a flagship of the PMI. And if you see the various publications of PMI, one of the important publication which is being referred by many project managers and many aspirants of the various certifications like PMP, which is one of the most valued and the popular certifications, which is globally recognized. For that, you need to know PMBOK. And therefore, one of the flagship publications of the PMI is definitely the PMBOK. Now, PMI, as I mentioned earlier as well, is definitely one of the non-profit organization which actually helps in putting together these guidelines, these principles, which actually helps many project management people who are working in the project management areas. As I mentioned to you about the RDS, which is nothing but the role delineation study, and this particular study, which is conducted every 5 to 7 years. And this study actually gives a lot of insights to the PMI in order to evolve the PMBOK. So PMBOK evolves every 5 to 7 years, and we'll take a look into the evolution of the PMBOK in the next slide itself. Now, if you take a look at the number of editions that were launched earlier and the latest edition, the PMBOK was first introduced in 1996. And from there, the journey of PMBOK started. And now, in September 2017, the sixth edition was introduced. So if you take a look at the timeline, since 96 to 2017, there are various surveys, various studies which were conducted by engaging various experts in the area of project management across the globe. And all these people who are experts into the project management, they came together. PMI engages them effectively for various studies and surveys, taking their inputs, and all that important information actually helps in the evolution of the PMBOK. So the third edition was introduced in 2004. The fourth edition was released in 2008. The fifth edition was released in 2013, and now the latest one, which is September 2017. So this is the journey of the PMBOK evolution. From 1996 to 2017, there are various editions which were released, and now the one that is referred to is the sixth edition. And I don't know how many of you really aware, but there have been recently also a few changes done in the examination in March 2017. So the new examination pattern of the PMP is based on the March 2017 changes. In fact, March 2018 changes, not 17. So we can certainly refer to some of those changes that were done in March 2018 in the PMP examination, because the new exam of the PMP is based on those changes. And it also certainly refers to the latest PMBOK guide, which is the sixth edition. So that was a bit of a history, that was a bit of a background, and most importantly, bit of on the evolution of the PMBOK. Now also take a look at how PMBOK 5th edition and the PMBOK 6th edition can be compared. If you put this together, you would find there are certainly a lot of enhancements that were done. In fact, I must say that the PMBOK 6th edition is definitely one of the edition which actually contains lots of changes. And even if you take a look at the number of pages that were there in the 5th edition, there were 616 pages. But now the total number of pages have now been enhanced, now been increased to 978 pages, which of course includes the Agile Practice Guide as well. Since there is a lot of focus on Agile in the market and companies are preferring the Agile ways of working as well, so PMI has definitely noticed it, recognized it, and this insight also came from a lot of practitioners, which is appreciated, and those changes have been incorporated in the 6th edition. Not only that, PMI has also released a separate Agile Practice Guide, which is around 186 pages. So putting that together, the total number of pages in 6th edition are now 978. I'm sure this will give you an idea about the kind of changes that have been done in the 6th edition. So definitely we can say this is one of the major edition in terms of the kind of changes and the number of changes that were done. So some of the statistics and some of the specifics, if you look into, I'm just going to glance you through this and we'll take some of the specific examples as we go ahead. So PMBOK 5th edition, there were 47 processes altogether. As a part of the enhancement, there are now 2 more processes added. And now there are total 49 processes. Now, since there is also 1 more process deleted, and we'll take a look into some of these actual examples. But very quickly, if I have to just mention here, for example, manage project knowledge is something that's added, or implementing the risk responses is something which is added newly. And we'll take a look at some of the more changes that have been done in the PMBOK 6th edition. Apart from that, the another important change you will find is in number of chapters. So now number of chapters are just 10 chapters, but you'll find there are a lot of focus which have been added, especially from the role of the project manager, because role of the project manager is been added as a separate chapter altogether in the PMBOK 6th edition, which is definitely very useful. And we will also be talking about another important angle, which is PMI talent triangle, which gives a lot of insights into the importance of being aware and importance of being developed as a project manager into areas like business, like technology, like leadership. So we'll also touch upon that as one of the important changes in the PMBOK 6th edition. All right, so before I move further, I think there is a quick question here as I see. in terms of the deletions. So this question is from Gaurav, and he's asking if there is anything which is deleted out of the PMBOK 6th edition. Definitely, as I mentioned, that out of the PMBOK 6th edition, in comparison to the 5th edition, there is one of the thing that's deleted. I can definitely highlight here is one of the process within the procurement management, which is close procurement, is deleted. And we'll talk about that a bit more. Why is it deleted? And does it really make sense? And how does it make sense, in fact? So we'll talk about that as well. So I hope that answers your question. All right. Thanks for that confirmation. Moving to the another important change in terms of the change to the naming of the processes. So there are a few processes that were renamed. So for example, acquire project team now becomes acquire resources. One of the reason is also about it's not just about people in the team. When we talk about resources, there are a lot of other resources also which needs to be acquired. It could be machineries, it could be different licenses that are required to run the project, etc. So now PMBOK talks about acquiring the other resources apart from, of course, people. Control communication has now become monitor communication because it's about continuous monitoring, which is required once you have the communication plans in place. Control risk now becomes monitor risks. So we need to, on a regular basis, go on monitoring the risk. So once we have a risk register prepared, it's important for us to continuously monitor risks. Control stakeholder engagement now becomes monitor stakeholder engagement. Again, the same principle is applicable here. Once we identify stakeholder and create the list of stakeholders and the risk response, the stakeholder strategy, once we have that in place, it's important for us to go on monitoring that. Develop project team now becomes develop team. Now, when we talk about develop team, it's definitely beyond just the project team because we keep on interacting with a lot of teams beyond the project team just. Managed project team has now become managed team. So a lot of focus is there from the overall the team management's point of view. Perform quality assurance has now become managed quality. Now we talk about managing the overall quality on the outcome or the product or a service or a result that we are producing. Plan human resource management has now become plan resource management. As I mentioned, when we talk about resources on the project, it's just not about the human resources. It's also about the other resources that we use on the project. It could be the machineries, it could be the other licenses that are required, it could be even the hardware and softwares that are required. So all that put together becomes the list of resources that are required on the project. So all of those needs to be a part of your resource management plan. So these are some of the specific changes in terms of the processes. Now, since there have been a changes in the number of processes, you'll find these particular processes have now been renamed accordingly. Plan stakeholder management has now become plan stakeholder engagement because we are talking about engaging the stakeholders effectively once we have a stakeholder list in place. So how can we come up with the response strategy to the stakeholders and we can move them from one level to the another level based on the kind of engagement that we have on the project. Moving from there, let's also take a look at some more changes in terms of movements within the processes. So definitely one of the processes that have been moved from the project time management, earlier it was called as the time management in the 5th edition. Now we call it as project resource management. The new name to the time management is the schedule management, but this particular process have completely been moved from the project time management to project resource management. So when it comes to estimating activity resources, now it's going to be done as a part of the resource management because a separate attention, a separate focus is been given to managing the resource related activities and estimating the time required for that. So this is another important change that's been done. Taking a pause here, looking at the questions. So I can see here one of the questions from Amit, and he's asking about what are the changes that are done from agile point of view. All right, so that's a good question. I completely understand because now many projects are running on agile. So as I mentioned earlier, PMI has made a note of it, and there are a few changes that have been done that have been introduced as a part of the 6th edition, and we'll be talking about those changes as well. Very quickly to talk about, as I mentioned, now there is an agile practice guide which is separately introduced by the PMI. Apart from the agile practice guide, agile is now also been covered by the end of each of the knowledge areas. So that's an additional thing that is done in the 6th edition by PMI. We'll take a look at some of those specific changes from the agile point of view as well as we proceed. So I hope that's fine with you and I answered your question as well. Great. Thanks for that quick confirmation. Let's move to the next topic now, understanding what's new from only the PMBOK 6th edition point of view. Let's take a look at that. From the new editions point of view, there are certainly a few new additions that are done in terms of processes, which are those processes are now been added here. So as I mentioned earlier, the processes like control resources is now there as a new process under project resource management knowledge area, which of course fits into monitoring and controlling process group. Apart from that, implement risk response, which is now a part of the project risk management under executing process groups. Manage project knowledge is now added newly as a part of the project integration management, which is definitely a part of the executing process groups. So these are the three processes which are added completely new as a part of the 6th edition. And it definitely makes a lot of sense, as you would recognize, as you would appreciate in terms of why some of these processes are added as a part of these knowledge areas. As I mentioned earlier, one of the example of the process which is deleted, and that process is close procurement. And why does it make sense? If you really take a look, project management or project manager is not really involved heavily as a part of closing procurement, because most of these activities that are done as a part of the procurement manager or the legal team's responsibility. And this has come very clearly from all the experts as well. And if you're working in the organization, I'm sure you will also support this change very clearly, because if you see from the close procurement point of view, closing those contracts and closing those the agreements that are there with various vendors, etc. So all those activities are largely managed independently by the procurement team and the legal team, compliance team, etc. So hence now here we don't need to really get into much. Once we initiate the closure, rest of the activities are done by the procurement team itself. And therefore, close procurement is now deleted from the 6th edition of the PMBOK. So that's another major change. In terms of addition of the new processes, if you see addition of the new chapter altogether, as I mentioned earlier as well, role of project manager is the new chapter which is introduced by the PMI in the PMBOK 6th edition. As I was mentioning about this PMI talent triangle, there are three different aspects of the triangle which are covered as part of this chapter, covering about the business aspects under strategic business and management, which actually make a lot of sense, because as a project manager, we need to understand the business aspects as well. That will give you a lot of insights, right, from how the business case was initiated, what is the context behind the project, etc. Technical and project management knowledge is very, very crucial for any project manager, whether it's a software project or whether it is a construction project or the research and development project. Having that technical knowledge certainly gives you an edge over others. And of course, the project management knowledge is must to have. Leadership certainly makes a lot of value add over here, because whether people are reporting into you or it's completely a metric structure, it doesn't really matter. You need to drive things by engaging all the stakeholders, and there you need those leadership skills. So leadership skills is definitely becomes one of the important aspects of the PMI's talent triangle. Moving from there, continuing the new additions, definitely there are a few changes that are done from tools and techniques point of view as well. So under tools and techniques, you'll find that total, if you put together, there are around 132 tools and techniques that are there in this particular edition. What's done differently is that they have grouped some of these tools and techniques together under the areas like communication or data analysis or decision making, etc., which is kind of the logical grouping of some of these tools and techniques that is being done, which definitely make a lot of sense. When we refer to PMBOK, when we do the study, it actually helps in relating these tools and techniques to the respective groups. So overall, there are 132 of them under these various groups. Some of these groups are mentioned on the slide as well. Apart from that, there have been changes that are done from the agile point of view. This is where your question will also get answered, Amit. So introduction to agile was done from the point of view of covering the various aspects related to the agile ways of working. And those aspects are focused by addition of the agile and adaptive environments under each of the knowledge areas. So be it communications management, or be it risk management, be it schedule management. So if you pick up any of these knowledge areas, under these knowledge areas, very specifically, some of these agile aspects are covered. Again, from the tools and techniques and inputs and the outputs point of view as well, some of the agile ways of working and the techniques have been specifically highlighted and covered as part of the sixth edition. Agile, iterative, adaptive, and hybrid environments. There is a separate section altogether under appendix, which talks about the iterative ways of working, adaptive ways of doing the planning, etc. And a separate practice guide, as I mentioned earlier as well, which is 186 page separate practice guide is also introduced. The another important point here to note is this agile practice guide is also very useful when you are appearing for the PMI ACP examination. So if you are into agile and you have relevant experience, and if you are aspiring to become the PMI ACP, which is Agile Certified Practitioner, for that also the Agile Practice Guide will be very, very useful. Now, continuing from there, let's also take a look at small change in terms of the notations, like ongoing processes, non-ongoing processes. You'll find this one of the small changes in terms of the notations that is done. Another good thing, in fact, from the point of view of reaching out to more people, the PMI has really taken into consideration some of the changes in terms of making the PMBOK 6th edition available into various languages. And as you can see on the screen, there are various languages into which the PMI 6th edition is now available, and which is definitely a welcome change, because PMI caters to various certifications and those can be done by people across domain and industries. So irrespective of which domain and irrespective of which industry you work in, the PMBOK knowledge can be very, very useful to refer to, from taking that guidance, taking that principles, references from the project management point of view. So this brings us to the end of this webinar. I hope you must have got a good overview into the PMBOK 6th edition and the kind of changes that have been done as part of the 6th edition when it was launched in September 2017. Not only that, we also covered as part of this webinar the comparison between the PMBOK 6th edition and the 5th edition. So all that put together, I'm sure some of the questions that you had about the PMBOK, its history and how it evolved and comparisons, what it contains, etc., must have got addressed in today's webinar. So thank you once again for joining the webinar, and I wish you all the best for the PMP examination or PMI ACP examination that you may have planned for. So don't just learn it, master it with Edureka's courses on PMP and the PMI ACP training programs. Thank you for enrolling for the course.
I hope you have enjoyed listening to this video. Please be kind enough to like it, and you can comment any of your doubts and queries, and we will reply them at the earliest. Do look out for more videos in our playlist and subscribe to Edureka channel to learn more. Happy learning!